So we're engaging in talking about these tools. We're engaging in reading other things that are similar and have a lot of overlap and presenting those, and we're talking about them or showing videos or audios of this kind of work in our support groups. And one of the reasons for that is that in the very first 4-hour audio of Dr. Michael Ryce's teachings that I was given by a friend of mine from high school years ago, Michael talked about how when you're faced with learning something new, and something that has depth to it and that is different than anything that you've been exposed to before, Michael said the more different ways you hear about it from more different perspectives, the quicker you will understand what there is to learn, and the deeper your knowledge will be, the deeper your understanding will be. So in that original talk, he said, so we're going to talk about this work from a psychological perspective, from a hard science physics perspective, from a religious perspective, from a social perspective, and by the time you're done hearing about what all of these different disciplines have to say about this process, or the core of a process like this, you'll understand more quickly, and at a deeper level. And I've found that to be true myself, and I've taken it to heart, which is why we present stories that Guy Finley might tell, or things we learned from The Way of Mastery, or things that we learned from the teachings of somebody like Dale Allen Hoffman, or the work of Diedrich Wolsack with his 6-step forgiveness process, or Byron Katie's work with her The Work, which is questioning every negative thought we have because she's observed for herself that she only suffers when she believes her negative thoughts. I had somebody email me this morning asking for some clarification. So here's a person who, when she first got introduced to this work, she hadn't heard of the term holding space for someone. And she says, if you could expand on the meaning of holding space for self and others along with tools. What things can one say in the midst of a conflict to hold space while being mindful about the process of rescuing or enabling, along with some examples? She says that she chanced upon one of Matt Kahn's talks or little classes. I think she said it's on the Sounds True website. And the title of his offering was All for Love, the Transformative Power of Holding Space. And you can find it at mattkahn.org, K-A-H-N, all one word, M-A-T-T-K-A-H-N.org. And what she's listened to so far says there appear to be connections to the work we do here. Well, so if you've never heard a phrase like holding space before, or being the space of love before, again, they're just words. And one of the things we teach in this work is that it is directly observable that the words have no meaning in and of themselves until a human being has information stored in his or her memory banks for that word. And over time, we enrich, expand, or contract the meaning we give to various words, which is, just fundamentally, the word itself has no meaning unless there's a human mind that's attributed meaning to it. So quite literally, every language, all the words that we use, they've been made up by other human beings. And when they're made up by human beings, they attribute certain meanings or sequences of behavior with that word. One of the examples that has stuck with me over the years is there's an auditorium full of people, and it's one of those tiered auditoriums so that the chairs are stacked in an escalating, rising way, going up, and so as you look down at the podium on the stage, there's a lecturer giving a lecture, and all of a sudden, from stage left, a person runs out and starts yelling excitedly in a language, let's say this is happening here in America, in Russian. And there's nobody in the auditorium that understands Russian. But the person is gesturing wildly and getting more and more agitated until she runs off and then drags back a person who is her translator and keeps saying the same thing. And the translator says, "There's a fire in the building." Instantly, everybody leaves. But the person was saying words that to her meant there's a fire in the building, but the people in the audience had no content in their brain, no meaning in their brain for the words she was saying. They certainly had meaning in their brain for the event of fire burning the building, but the words have no meaning. The content of the brain, memory, life experience of the person who hears the word or receives the vibration of the word, that's what carries the meaning. Sometimes people come from families where there's a lot of good-natured joking and teasing, and it's very loving and respectful, and so when somebody laughs around one of those people who comes from a family where there's a lot of love and good-natured laughter, and then the response of the person who hears the laughter when they come from a very loving, good-natured family is they feel lighthearted. They enjoy the laughter. And there are other families where they're very edgy, they're very angry, they're very sarcastic, they're very cutting, and the laughter is always laughing at someone. It's always an insult. It's always, if somebody takes a fall, then they're laughed at and ridiculed. So when that person hears laughter, they get tight and tense and defensive. So the laughter doesn't carry the meaning. The laughter is just a vibration of sound that resonates the meaning that's already in the mind of the person who hears that vibration. So, what does it mean to hold space for somebody? It means different things for different people. What does it mean to hold the space of love for somebody? It means different things to different people. As they have been introduced to it over time, by, the layers of meaning are loaded in from the content of the word and the words that are said around it, and also the emotional attachment, strong positive, neutral, or strong negative, that the individual has for the person who's trying to tell them what it means. So I've had a number of people in my life who are they're very liberal in their thought process, and they're very open to energy work and things that aren't able to be measured so clearly by scientific instruments, but a lovely emotional experience, and they like the kinds of people that go to those events where they're doing love exchanges or they're doing sending energy healing work. But I've also had around a lot of people who just, they turn up their noses at that. And they say, oh, there's nothing to this, this is quackery, and if it's not hard science provable with some kind of a device that I can measure it on, then it doesn't really exist. And so if somebody from either of those two schools comes to me and starts telling me about holding the space for somebody, and it's not based in what our scientific instruments can measure, it's about intention or about emotions, or then the one person's going to receive it far more willingly and with a positive set of tunings and flavors to it, and the other person is going to receive it very judgmentally and negatively, or push it away altogether, or write it off as worse than useless, right? Harmful because it distracts people from the real science and what's really going on. So what makes the most sense to me is people like Pierre Pradervan, when he talks about going into yourself, turning the focus of your attention into your heart space, into the space within you, wherever it's located, where you feel emotions strongly. And hopefully you'll tune into feeling positive emotions strongly. And the way you do that is you bring up memories. You bring up thoughts that are specifically tied to certain memories that had a positive emotional feeling to them. And you practice strengthening that energy, that emotional energy state within you, by concentrating on the thoughts part of or associated with the memories of the physical, visceral experience of this loving, safe, calm, happy, joyful. These are various words that just have different meanings for people too, but those kinds of things, those kinds of energy vibrations. And so he talks about blessing and doing a blessing from that space, going within yourself and generating that loving energy feeling within your energy field, within the body that we call, the energy field that we call the body, and generating that loving energy, and then holding an image of the person, regardless of what kind of behavior they're exhibiting, holding an image of them in their highest and best, and sending the energy of that image, visualizing them in their highest and best, sending it through that loving energy, the deepest, most viscerally felt loving, safe, positive energy you can. That is a really good example of holding space for somebody. So for me, over the years, as I've worked with this, it makes a lot of sense for me to say, I'm holding space, holding the space of love for someone, or holding space for them, when I refuse to buy into any negativity that they may be demonstrating or blaming me of, and I visualize and feel as loving, as calm, as safe, as joyful energy as I can within me, and I project that into my image of this person. Whether you want to call it sending them a blessing of that, or holding the space for that, or whether you want to call it this ancient Aramaic process of humility, which is defined as the ability to see the highest and best in another person, and then choose to cooperate only with that. Yes, they might be raging at somebody. Yes, they might be crying and overwhelmed with depression. Yes, they might be running around in an anxiety or panic attack. And yet, within that person, there is the potential to be so much more. There is the potential to be the extension of the energy of creation in form. There is the potential to be loving and respectful and patient and kind. And so holding the space for that person, one way to talk about holding the space for that person is for me to identify the highest and best in them, and then just send my mental, emotional energy out toward them from that highest and best place, because the highest and best place in me is the same as the highest and best place in them, and send loving thoughts and energies to them from that space of energy, of vibration, of emotion. So that's one way to think about holding space for someone. It weaves into the ancient Aramaic definition for humility. It dovetails very nicely with things that Guy Finley talks about and Matt Kahn talks about. And it's really something that over the years I've had to work a lot at, because it's not something I was trained to do. It's not something my culture holds out as a priority. It's not something that rarely in groups, whether it was classes or individual group meetings, was I encouraged to do that with and for other people. And so it's a practice of where I focus my mind energy, and a practice of alertness and sensitivity to what I'm focusing that mind energy on, because as we talk about so often in this work, what I focus my thought energy on amplifies whatever I'm focusing it on. Mike Dooley says, thoughts become things, so choose the good ones. The Way of Mastery says, you don't experience anything that you haven't chosen. You experience only the effects of your choice. So choose to focus on loving thoughts. You start to have the experience of the energy fields shifting in you towards loving, towards peaceful, calm, gentle, towards appreciation, towards gratitude. Now, the email asks, so, are there examples? Are there tools for doing that? Well, I suppose that the tools, if someone was to ask me, what tools can I use for this, the primary tool is the choice of where I focus my thought. The primary tool is my willingness. The primary tool is vigilance. The primary tool is my choice, and I don't have to buy into the image somebody else is holding for themselves or me. So someone can come at me and say that I am rude and I'm angry and I'm impatient, and I don't have to buy into that. Someone can come at me and demonstrate the behaviors that I think are in alignment with being rude and being impatient and being angry and being hurtful. But I don't have to buy into that that's their true essence. I can understand that anybody who's putting out those behaviors that would be in alignment with these negative emotional states or judgments that I've been conditioned to make, that that's not their true nature. I can choose to focus on a higher, more integrated nature for consciousness, and understand that every human being has consciousness, and I can choose to pour my mental, emotional energy into cooperating with the highest and best in the other person. You know, one of the things we talk about extensively in my work in the private practice and in the support groups is that whatever comes out of somebody's mouth is about them, not about the people around them or the world around them. And it's not possible for me to be in peace, in contentment, in gratitude, in appreciation, in affection, in its state of patience and comfort, and then have angry, hurtful, insulting words come out of my mouth. It's not possible because they're not in me. If I'm sitting here feeling gratitude and appreciation and comfort and patience and respect, then that's all that can come out of me. So anytime I hear or see a raised tone, a tightness, a tension, a yelling, a swearing, a name-calling, an insult come out of a person, I can instantly know that there's pain, fear, or sadness in that person, and it is such that they either choose not to deal with it within themselves, or they don't have the capacity to deal with it within themselves. One of the ways the Way of Mastery talked about it to us in an earlier lesson was, I can choose to understand that anybody who does me wrong, steals my stereo, breaks into my apartment, steals something, calls me a bad name or whatever, is another being of brilliance and light, another soul on the journey with me, and they simply haven't yet discovered, or they've temporarily forgotten, their ability to get whatever they need out of life without hurting anybody else. And if I understand that, if I breathe into it, if I observe directly what is directly observable, then I instantly change the energy that I am offering the moment and them in the moment and the situation. If I understand that if I go to judgment, if I go to a negative emotion, if I go to anger or fear or sadness in relation to another person, I'm feeling those things, and it's not caused by anything outside of me. We're just reading about this in Lesson 17. 100% responsibility for every emotion I experience. In Lesson 3, where the Way of Mastery is talking about the word of forgiveness. And the word of forgiveness defined in Lesson 3 as forgiveness means to choose to release another from the perceptions you have been projecting upon them. It is, therefore, an act of dismantling one's false projections. Now, I'm paraphrasing it a bit because I'm just distilling out the essence of this teaching. So, every time I choose to see somebody as bad or wrong, I could choose instead the insane way of looking at them according to the world, and looking upon that person as one who's just done an act as a brother or sister who is crying out for help and healing. What if I chose to look upon them as one who does not know how to live in this world without being of the world, one who does not know the way to dismantle their false perceptions, the way to self-forgiveness, one who does not know the truth of the light that lives within them, one who does not recognize their great power to create whatever they want in a way that's not hurtful to anyone else. If I chose to look upon them with compassion rather than reactivity, that is for me, that's a wonderful definition of holding space. I choose to see them as being just like me. Holding space, another way to talk about holding space is one of my favorite definitions for the word namaste. And I read this in one of the Ram Dass books back in the 70s. And he says, namaste, I honor the light within you. I honor the place in you of light and peace and love. I honor that place in you where when you go to that place in you and I go to that place in me, there's only one of us. Namaste. So if I hold on to that recognition that we are all sparks of the same light of consciousness, and we're all traveling around in this energy field within energy fields within energy fields, and none of us knows at an intellectual level much of anything compared to all that's going on in each and every moment. That's another good definition for me of holding the space of love or holding space for someone. Another way I talk about it is to say, the only significant difference between me and you or anybody who's ever lived is the degree to which we're able to live in the realization that we are all the same. And for those who know the word koan, that's a koan. How can the only difference be that we're all the same? The only difference between you and anybody who's ever lived is the degree to which you and or those people around you are able to live in the realization that we are all the same. That's another definition of holding the space for someone, holding the space of love, seeing that all there is creation, which is another word for love. All there is the energy that's giving rise to consciousness, that's giving rise to everything physical, that's giving rise to every thought and every emotion and every physical sensation you have. It's all part of the flow of life. And being able to be aware of that in the moment, rather than being distracted by, well, there's a pain in my toe, or I keep having thoughts about how bad this divorce is going to be, or I keep having thoughts about how little money there is in my checking account, or I keep having thoughts about what I heard this person say the other day about psychologists being idiots, and I'm chewing on it like a dog with a bone angrily. Rather than focusing on any minute aspect of life or my experience of life, if I step back and breathe and soften and open myself to questioning, how might I be a part of the flow of life in this moment in a way that leads to compassion, gratitude, appreciation, patience, healing, strength, connection, awareness. How might I ... How might I be a blessing for myself and others? That's another mechanical way to keep my thoughts focused on holding the space of love, holding space for someone. I can repeatedly ask, what's mine to do here to bless myself and others? What's going on here that is on the periphery of my senses that I might tune into that would allow me to be more respectful, more patient, more compassionate? All of these things, I would say, are things that are in the folder in my mind labeled holding space or holding the space of love for someone or sending someone a blessing. So this is all from an email that I received asking for clarifying, my thoughts about the phrase and the meaning holding space for self and others, and what are tools and what are examples. And one of the most powerful examples was I had a gentleman in my office, and he was a very concrete thinking person. He was a mechanical engineer. He worked on boiler systems and electrical and water systems in a building complex, jack of all trades kind of things. He had been a Marine when he was younger, so he had a lot of physical training. He was very strong physically, a very, very opinionated individual, a very strong presence. And he had a situation in his family where their emotions would run high and people would get angry, but there was also a lot of affection for each other. There was a lot of I would do anything for my family kind of energy in this family. And yet he had this daughter in her 20s who was having some rage issues. And one night there was a rage event. And he described it as he gets up very early for work, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. And so he went to bed at 9 o'clock and he was sound asleep. And all of a sudden there's this raging 20-something at his door, beating on his bedroom door. And he knows enough to lock his door when he goes to sleep at night because this kind of thing can happen. Well, this particular night, she wouldn't go away, and he kept saying, "We'll deal with it in the morning, whatever." And she was something in the kitchen she couldn't find. And so he gets out of bed, angrily throws the door open, pushes past her, goes into the kitchen, finds the thing that she said she couldn't find, throws it on the counter, and says, "There." Now, unbeknownst to him, she was charging after him because she didn't like that he had pushed her out of the way to get out of his bedroom. And so they go tumbling into the pantry, and somebody gets bruised and somebody gets scratched, and then she decides to call the police. Now, he, as the father, understands that his daughter has these emotional issues and says, she would never do well if she got arrested, and it would just escalate things and she'd fall apart mentally. So he takes the fall for her and he goes to jail. And then he, comes to therapy to say, okay, I need to change something because clearly things aren't going well in the house. And I talked to him about a lot of stuff that we've just talked about in this last 40 minutes, about how everything that comes out of my mouth is about me. And if there's anger or fear or sadness coming out of my mouth, any kind of insult or yelling or swearing or name-calling coming out of my mouth, it means there's pain, fear, or sadness inside of me. And we started talking about breathing and focusing inside and asking, how am I creating this emotion? And talked about these things. And I said, now, do you understand how if you were doing these things, the next time this kind of situation comes up with your daughter, it would be different? He looked at me like I had three heads, right? Because it's maybe our second session. And so I said, well, imagine it this way. Imagine that you're in the bed sleeping, and you're awakened because there's loud noises out in the hallway, just outside your door, and you shout from your bed, "I'm trying to sleep here, please be quiet," and there's more ruckus outside, and so you go and you throw open the door, and you find your daughter writhing on the floor in pain, and the swearing and the crying out is because she's in pain. Would you yell at her to shut up because you have to go to sleep, because you have to work in the morning? And he almost launched out of his chair at me. I love my daughter, and his fists were clenched like he's ready to punch me for even insinuating that he might ignore his daughter's pain. And so I said, okay, I get that about you, that you do love your daughter. Now, imagine this. Imagine that you're lying in bed and she's yelling at you, but you've had this input that if she's yelling and swearing and name-calling, it means there's pain, fear, or sadness in her. And so instead of being angry that she's waking you up, you open the door and say, honey, what's the matter? How can I help you? When she's yelling at you and swearing at you. Because if she's yelling and swearing at you, it means she is in pain. It's just not the kind of physical pain that we had in the previous example where she's rolling around on the floor. It's mental, emotional, very real pain that people are feeling when they're expressing anger and swearing and name-calling. And for any of us who are trained to pay attention to that, especially for those of us who are dealing with people that we have great affection for and or feel responsible for, it becomes much, much easier to shift the lens, right, to see the highest and best in them, to see them as being exactly like me and probably in pain or fear or confusion or sadness, and then it changes my energetic experience and it easily changes what I say and do, gives it an entirely different flavor. And if you think about this as, here's the stew, the interaction between me and another person is like a stew. It's got all these various ingredients in it. It's not just two ships passing in the night. We exchange volumes of information with each other all the time before we ever open our mouths. There are energetic impressions. There are energy fields. There are vibrations. There are histories and intention. There's the resonance of my pain or the resonance of my joy that radiates out from me and interacts with the energy fields of the other people around me. This is very real. And so I can shift what I'm adding to that stew. When I step back and realize, oh, there's a tightness or a tension in me, that means I must have a pain or a fear or a sadness in me that I'm not aware of. Let me ask, how am I creating that? Rather than blaming it on the people or things outside of me, even if that someone is standing right in front of me yelling at me. And I focus on the energies that I'm experiencing, therefore the ones I'm creating, they're the same thing, and I shift them to a more calm, respectful, cherishing or gratitude-based energy, appreciation-based energy, and then I speak or act or send emotional energy to the other person from that space. That's all part of, in my mind, the meaning behind the phrase holding space for someone, or holding the space of love for someone, or namaste, or understanding that we're all beings of brilliance and light. Every one of us is a being of brilliance and light, and we're either acting from the direct awareness of that being, or we've temporarily forgotten or yet to discover our true nature. So, I thank you, author of this email, for sparking that monologue, and we've got about 15 minutes left, so I will throw it open for comments or questions. 563-999-3581. What does it mean to you? Have you been exposed to the phrase holding the space of love, holding space for someone? Do you have a different meaning for it? Are there tools, specific tools you use? I meant to add earlier that I will frequently add knowledge of the acupuncture meridians and finger rubbing or wrist rubbing or squeezing to stimulate my energy flow so that I don't build up energy related to negative thoughts and the emotions they generate. So I'm thinking in terms of letting this energy flow through me, and the EFT tapping or the shortcut of finger rubbing and breath work, doing the breathing that has me extend my exhale for 10 seconds or more, that sends that irrefutable message to my physical body that I'm not in danger. I don't need to respond with adrenaline and rapid heart rate and increased blood pressure and increased rapid shallow respiration to oxygenate the blood to get ready for a fight or to get ready to run. So those are other things I would add as tools: the breath and the rubbing the ends of my fingers, or the massaging my fingers, and or gently squeezing the wrist pulse points as tools that help me move into that space of calm and generate those more respectful, gratitude-based, appreciation-based positive energies and thoughts, and then extend them to the other person. So 563-999-3581. What are your thoughts about holding the space, of love for someone, being the space of love for someone? Area code 610, is this Susan?
Yeah, it's a very good email and a very good talk. My son came up the other day to help me keep that kind of loving space with our grandson Jacob before he finally was sent away to a rehab place. And either we didn't do it well enough or something. We were gentle with him and saying things like, you are under great stress now. This must be very hard. And he was there was really nothing we could say that would be perceived by him as holding a loving space. He would yell at us like we're manipulating him, we're trying to control him. The background on him is that he tends to trust strangers more than family members, which is what his father did. His father had a tremendous charm, and he was very bright, and he could attract people. But once they were on an inner circle, a very inner circle, like his wife, suddenly he didn't trust anymore, and a different side of his personality. It was really like two people. And his son, two oldest sons, seem to have taken this on, but the middle one, the second to the oldest, we're afraid that maybe he just can't. Hang on one sec. Tim, can you handle that? Yeah. Okay. We ended up having to call the police.
You're afraid that maybe he can't what? You were saying you're afraid that he can't what?
He can't get well. I know that's a very negative thought. And I'm hoping that the rehab people, who are strangers, he may be listening to them. But I'm afraid that when he comes back, we will be the inner circle bad guys who have nothing but bad motives toward him. And I'm telling you about some fears that may not even be real, but we ended up having to call the police because he got so belligerent. He was trying to beat down the door, and we were afraid to have him in the house overnight. We thought he might hurt us, and we never got ugly with him at all. But we had to do these things, and I know you would say that's fine. You have to do that sometimes. But holding the space of love is the only and best way even to approach something like this. But sometimes it doesn't seem to have an immediate good effect. And perhaps we weren't holding it purely enough. I felt attacked, and I was having to do breathing, and I kept pretty quiet. My son took over. He was very gentle. But then Jacob began attacking him and saying that he was an abuser and he had evil plans for him, and we had nothing but ill will toward him. And it was really an experience with a very mentally ill, I hope it's temporary, person. So anyway, I'm just adding that even though everything you said I will continue to do, but sometimes it's really hard and it doesn't have obvious good outcomes.
Well, that's the. I'm glad you went back to that. It doesn't have obvious good outcomes, and I'm put to mind of those world-class philosophers, the Rolling Stones, and they wrote how you can't always get what you want, but you try sometimes.
Right.
You just might find you get what you need. Well, so it didn't work out the way your mind told you it should work out, and yet you don't know. It might have been the perfect thing, right? It might have been the perfect thing to call the police, to have them get involved. It might be the perfect thing that your grandson needs to move to the next level of healing for him. We don't know these things.
Yeah.
And so rather than being in the space of saying, because I didn't get what I wanted in the moment, because I wanted this person to resonate with the love I was sending and just make it be a love fest right then and there and dramatically change their behavior, because that didn't happen, I say it didn't work. I have really, really confined and constricted this expansive moment of the flow of creation down to a few tiny bits that my mind can understand. But the flow of creation, it doesn't get confined. We just cause pain and contraction and fear and upset within ourselves because we try to make it conform. But, imagine standing in the middle of the Mississippi River and thinking you're going to say a few words and it's going to reverse course. It doesn't work that way. It's okay that it doesn't work that way. There's this flow of life going on. There's this history that your grandson has had with his dad and his mom and all the various people that he's interacted with through his whole life. All of that was coming together in this moment, and you're not responsible for any of that. You're just responsible for what you do with it. And if you stand there and stay loving and stay calm and stay gentle and respectful, and at times, calling the police is the most respectful thing to do. It's a way to try and keep people safe. It's a way to try and keep them from doing damage to themselves and others. And so I'm not saying this, it's all got to be a love fest where we just sit around with flowers in our hair, right? The Cowsills song, flowers in our hair, flowers everywhere. Yeah. I'm not saying that. I'm saying your responsibility in that moment is related to what you feel, think, say, and do, how you're using your mind energy. And if you stayed gentle and respectful and you held limits that excluded continual abuse to you and others, that's one of the most loving things you can do. And then when you look at that and you say, I did this and it didn't work, you've got this myopic view, this tiny slice. How do you know it didn't work? It didn't work. I didn't get the exact result I wanted, but there's a result. Yeah. Like the other thing we said in a call a few weeks ago where you said, and all I could do was this, as though it was some little thing, right? Sending loving energy, sending blessings to people is a massively powerful thing to do. It's not this tiny little thing. It's not like, there's nothing I could do but this. Yeah, that's a lot. That is one of the most beneficial things anyone can do for anyone, themselves or anyone else. Go into the source energy, which is one of the ways you tap into it is with your mind energy, your conscious logical thought process. Shift it over to something loving, respectful, strengthen it, pour the force of your will into it and gently, respectfully extend that to yourself and others, that is one of the most powerful things you will ever do.
Mm.
And just because the unfolding of events doesn't map out according to the way you would like it to, it doesn't mean it didn't work or something went wrong. You know, I'm telling you this from I'm telling you this from direct life experience. I've had people in my family. I've had a cousin who was decidedly younger than me, so much younger that growing up he would call me Uncle Tim, but we were technically just first cousins, and he ended up getting into legal problems that ended him in jail and then eventually prison. And if you met him today, you wouldn't say to yourself, "Oh my God, this is such a loser." Right? He has his own business. He makes lots of money. He has an incredibly driven work ethic. Some would say he's a workaholic, but what does he do? He does nice things for friends and family on a regular basis. He goes out of his way to maintain family connections. How do we know that, if he hadn't ended up getting in trouble and going to prison, that he'd be anywhere near as nice today as he is? We don't know that.
Mm.
My own son decided to say he didn't have to follow any rules and ended up having jail time at one time. We've talked about that. And today, you'd be hard-pressed to find a more respectful, fun, intelligent, caring person than my son.
That's wonderful.
Now, does that mean he had to have that to get there? I don't know, but I do know that event, those series of events, didn't ruin his life. And I could have created a lot more consternation and upset and or been motivated to do things that weren't very good for me or anybody else if I'd gone into the deep, dark, "Oh, woe is me, I can't believe he's doing this, I was a horrible father, everything's lost." If I'd gone into those thoughts, it would not have helped anything. I can tell you that for sure.
Mm.
So, choose the loving thoughts. Choose to see everybody as being on their own path. Choose to understand the power of holding the space or being loving for someone, sending that loving energy out, regardless of what they throw back to you, and watch what happens. We ask people, don't trust this, don't just believe this, be in the observing state, be in the questioning state. See if it works as well for you as it has for so many of these teachers of the great spiritual truths. And then you're living in the moment, you're living from direct observation, and you don't need to be validated from the outside.
Good.
All right. Well, you've helped us use our last few minutes here. I thank you for the call and raising your hand, and I'll mute you so you can listen to the second hour. Many blessings, Susan, and I think it's Ann who has her hand up. We haven't gotten to yet, but Jeannie will.